Today I'm going to do an overview of my Schwinn Meridian tricycle with a Bug Deluxe motor. This isn't my first video on this. I have a couple others doing things such as installing the engine, restoring the cover, and doing a few little repairs. And if you haven't seen any of those, go check them out after you watch this one. But today I'm going to do just a general overview, demo, and at the end I'll take it for a little ride. So as far as the trike goes, I kind of inherited it more or less. It belonged to my uncle and he used it to get around the city and get to work. When he passed away 7.5 years ago, my grandmother ended up with it, who was his sister, and she held on to it in her backyard under a tarp for 5 years. And then one day I decided to take it. Thought I could have some fun with it since she wasn't doing anything with it. And I kind of tossed around the idea of putting an engine on it, but one mounted on the back. But I never got around to doing anything with it, and it ended up sitting in our yard for about 1.5 years. I toyed around with, again, a gas engine on the back, even an electric motor kit. But then I discovered the Bug engines, saw a video on them on YouTube one day, and looked into them. And then eventually I remembered I had this and thought that would be cool to put on that, have a gas engine on it, but not have to remove the basket or anything to put it on the back. So I found one on eBay, but it's actually not this one that's on it right now. It's my other engine that is on my blue Sears Free Spirit bike that I did a video on a few months back. If you watched that video, you might remember me saying that I bought the engine before I bought the bike, and that's basically why. It was intended for this, but then I found the Sears bike and I kind of had to put one on that. So then a few weeks later, this one popped up and I bought it for the trike. And I wanted the shrouded version anyway for the trike because I thought that would look cooler than the metal tank version that's on my blue bike. So it kind of worked out the way it all happened. Other than this engine is a Bug Deluxe and the other one is a Bug. They were also branded as Sears Free Spirit, which would have matched the blue bike perfectly. But I wasn't planning that when shopping for these. Again, I didn't even have the Sears bike yet, so I had no idea. So it is what it is. And here comes the helicopter, so I'll cut. Yeah, it sucks trying to make videos outside when you live close to an airport. But anyways, as far as accessories on the trike goes, I installed a mirror over here. This horn was on it when it belonged to my uncle, and the rust shows its age. Everything else is stuff that I added. This light for at night. I added a cup holder off of another bike that I had a while back. This is the throttle for the engine, and this is the handle for the rear drum brake. If you notice, I don't have a front brake. I tried to put a front brake on, but there wasn't any way that I could mount it without it interfering with the engine back here. Maybe out there they have some kind of skinny caliper brake that would work, but it gets by without it. You get engine braking, so it's not really much of a problem. And you may notice that the fork doesn't match the rest of the trike, and that's because it doesn't match. I had to swap out the forks to get the motor to fit, because the mounting arms of the engine are too narrow for most modern bikes. I touched on this in my first video of this Trike and engine, where I mounted it on here. So yeah, keep that in mind if you want to attempt to mount one of these onto a modern bike. Most bikes from back then always had narrower forks, and this fork came from an older bike. But before I get to the engine, the last accessory I have is back here in the basket. I just have this little tool kit. I keep a lock in there and some other junk. Well, normally there would be tools in there, but they're all inside. And I also have a homemade trailer hitch. I put that on there when I first got this from my grandma, and I do have a trailer for it, but that's a work in progress. Maybe I'll get around to working on that and doing a video on it in the future. But back to this. That covers the whole tricycle itself and the accessories. So now I'll show you the engine. And I know it doesn't look much like an engine, but that's because, as I mentioned before, this is a plastic engine cover that fits over it to make it a little more appealing. And in my previous video on this trike and engine combo, I showed you how I cleaned up and restored the yellowed plastic on this cover, even though, as you can tell, it's still yellow, but it was a lot more yellow, and it looks a lot better and cleaner than how it was when I first got it. And as you can see, there's decals and racing stripes on the cover. There's Bug Deluxe badges on either side, and they continue the red and blue theme of the stripes. Right here is your gas cap for filling the gas tank. That protrudes out the top for convenience. You have louvers on the front and side right here for airflow. Right here is where the spark plug comes out, and that sticks out the top right there through that cutout. And there's a rubber boot that goes around it to kind of make a smooth transition. Back here, this big sticker shows the starting procedure, as well as the fuel mixture and the engine model. And speaking of that, these engines were made from around the mid 70s to mid 80s by a Japanese company called Tanaka, or Tanaka, however you would pronounce it. As you can see, made in Japan right here. And that was the company that built them. They were sold to and marketed by different companies, one being Bike Bug, and as previously mentioned, Sears Free Spirit. And there is also a brand of them labeled Taz, spelled T-A-S. So you could run across these engines with any of those three brand names, I guess. And hidden behind those louvers is a 22cc two-cycle engine pushing a mighty 1 horsepower, which even for this big thing pulls it along pretty good. Once you're rolling, it'll drive itself. You just can't start from a dead stop. And in a second, I will pop the cover off and show you that engine, but I still got some things that I didn't cover on the outside. Right here is the choke lever. It sticks out the back. There's a hole cut out for the throttle cable and kill switch wire and the spark plug wire. There is a grommet that goes here, but I don't have it installed right now. Let me cross over. And right here, there's actually a fuel gauge. There's a little gauge printed out on this sticker, which is pretty cool. As you can see, the half mark isn't halfway of the sight window though, and that's because a good bit of the tank sits below where this stops. So I find even on empty, you have a little bit of gas left in there. And the sticker right above shows the fuel ratio of gasoline to two-stroke oil. And it also says no gasohol. I've never heard of that term in my life, but I'm assuming that means no ethanol gas. I may be wrong, who knows. And lastly, right here, there's a cutout for the primer bulb. You push this a few times before you want to start it, and it puts fuel into the lines and the carburetor, and also primes the fuel pump. So that's everything on the outside of the cover. So let me take it off and show you what's underneath. So to get the cover off, there are 5 mounting screws, 2 back here, 2 up here next to the spark plug, and then 1 up here. But you also have to remove the gas cap and the spark plug to allow it to come off. So I'll get that done and I'll be right back. So that's what you do when you need to get under there and work on something. But if you really need to work on it, to take the whole cover off the bike, you gotta get the throttle cable out of here and feed it through that opening. So yeah, it's not really a easy thing to service with the cover on, but at least it's reliable, so you don't have to that often. At least this one is. But I'll finish getting that off. And yet one more thing to undo that I forgot about is the kill switch wire. That has to come off too, and it's zip tied to the handlebar, which makes it even more annoying. And now it's off. It sure is handy having a built-in basket when you want to work on it. But anyways, now we can get a better look at this engine without the cover on top of it. The actual engine itself is right here. This is the cylinder behind this little guard right here with the spark plug on top. And in here is your flywheel and the points and condenser. Down here is the crank, and the output of the engine goes towards the front through here and out to your drive roller, which spins against the wheel to propel the bike forward. And this is not what the drive roller would look like originally. This is a skateboard wheel pressed onto the metal hub, because these being 40 to 50 years old, there's pretty much no surviving original rubber drive rollers. All the rubber is deteriorated and no good anymore. So the known solution is to put a skateboard wheel over the hub. Now back to the power output. This big housing looking thing is actually a clutch. This engine differs from the one on my blue Sears bike in that it has a centrifugal clutch, and that's pretty cool. But at first it might not make sense, because you basically have the engage or disengage lever that lifts the roller up off the tire or down onto the tire. So At first it may be like, what's the point? That's kind of how I was. But what that allows you to do is once the engine's started, you can leave the lever up constantly. So that means when you come up to a stop, like you want to stop at a stop sign, you don't have to throw the lever down when you come to a stop and then pedal and get going again and throw it up again. You can leave it up and not worry about it the whole time you're riding. You can come to a stop sign and slow down and the clutch will disengage, and then when you want to take off from the stop sign, you give it gas and it starts pulling itself forward again. So it's pretty cool. And sometimes when I ride my blue bike after riding this, I get used to having that clutch, and at the last second I forget that I have to drop that lever when I come to a stop. So it's pretty cool and pretty different from the other type of engine that's on my blue bike. I may do a future video comparing the two side by side and going over all the differences, even though the major two differences are having a clutch and having the plastic gas tank. But that may be a future topic for a future video. But for now, I'm gonna keep going over all the parts of this style. Again, you have the gas tank right here. It's a plastic one, unlike the metal one on my other engine. Here's that primer bulb that was peeking out of the cover, and that sends, yeah, you can't see that, but that sends gas throughout the whole fuel system and primes the pump and everything. And speaking of fuel pump, that is, if I can find it, right there under the flywheel cover. So gas goes from the tank through the primer down to the pump, and then back up from the pump up to the carburetor. And then from the carburetor you have the return line, which goes back to the tank. And this is a vent, at least that's what I think it is, because fuel never goes through there even though they're connected. And if you remember one of my previous episodes, I did a little repair / modification to this tank and the way these fuel lines connect. There originally would have been black rubber lines that went straight to the plastic tank, and they fit in the tank kind of like a grommet. Well, those were shrunken and the lines were cracked, so my solution to replacing those, I made some plastic fittings out of parts from the auto parts store and basically stuck those in there with a good tight friction fit and then sealed it on the outside with glue. You can see more on that in the video of how I went about doing that in more detail. But here's the carb and here's the air cleaner. This is not an original air cleaner. This is one off of a modern motorized bike, the little Chinese two-stroke engines that you can get on eBay and stuff today. If you know what I'm talking about, that's what this came off of. And back here is how the choke lever connects to the carb. And here's your typical slide with the cable that goes up to your throttle up here. And next to that is the kill switch. When you depress that, the engine stops. Moving on, try not to get too boring here, but here is the exhaust, and this is the muffler. But this is the first muffler. You also have a second muffler, which the owner's manual of these refers to as a sub muffler. And the two are connected with a flexible little rubber hose. And if you notice, wanted to point this out, this exhaust tip, that is not original. And if you watched my installation video on this engine, you would see that it would normally point straight. But the reason I did this little modification is, well, just ask my shoe. And also the pedals. Basically, this thing was spraying oil or unburnt fuel or something all over my foot and the pedals and even the tire some. Now, the engine's running clean. It's not coming from the engine. That's just stuff that's in the exhaust from before, because I cleaned as much out as I could when I first got this and cleaned through it and all. But it never stopped doing it, so I got fed up with it and I took some copper elbows as well as a little copper straight, just some fittings from Lowe's that fit over it, and now it points down at the ground and doesn't spray the stuff all over my foot anymore. So that's the exhaust. Right here is your roller engage lever. As I mentioned, this is how you engage or disengage the drive roller from the tire when you want drive or don't want drive, or when you want to start it. And to start one of these things is pretty easy. You just pedal and get up to speed, and when you're ready to start it, you lift up the lever, the roller catches the tire, which spins the engine over until it starts, and then you open your throttle and you're on your way. So that's pretty much the whole engine and how everything works. As far as mounting to the forks, I kind of forgot to mention earlier, you have these little bracket slash arm things, and they have plates on the back that grab onto the fork, and that's how it is mounted onto your forks on either side. And then this rod right here meets up with the sub muffler on your axle nut, and you have these little adjusting nuts right here, and you turn those up and down to set your roller height. There's basically a spec in which it needs to be for not having too much traction or too little traction. More on that in the mounting video. And there's another helicopter. Trust me, there are way more off camera too. Well, I think that covers everything on the engine, and that covers everything on the trike. So I guess now I'll put the cover on and we'll go take it for a little ride. All right, made it over to the test track. I pedaled over here and the exhaust is still cold, as you can see. These things usually will start with no choke, but with the cold weather lately, I find it likes to start on full choke, and then once it warms up, I back it off to half choke and it runs fine. So come over here and prime her up. And let's hop on and go. So as you can see, that's that clutch working. The engage lever is still in the up position. And you're able to sit still. And once you want to get going again, all you got to do is open that throttle back up. Well, there you have it. That's how she rides and operates. One thing to remember though about that clutch, if you want to shut it off while you're rolling, you do have to drop the engage lever down. Otherwise, you'll still be trying to start the engine while trying to kill it at the same time. Top speed on this is about 20, maybe more like 18 with the throttle maxed out. I cruise more around 14 to 15 most of the time. So she's not a speed demon, but she sure is a fun cruiser. And besides, that's plenty fast enough for a tricycle anyway. So that'll do it for the ride segment. So I'm gonna head on back home. Well, there you have it. That is my Schwinn Meridian with a Bug Deluxe engine. I hope you enjoyed and found it entertaining, and maybe even found some of the info helpful if you have one of these. I encourage you to also go check out the other videos on this, as well as the video, I think I only have one right now, of my blue Sears bike with the other variant of engine on it. If you enjoyed this demo of this guy, you'll like that one too. But that's gonna do it for this one. I hope you enjoyed, and thanks for watching, and see you in the next one.